Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. Welcome to Play Pause Turn. In this podcast we discuss all things to do with TV, films, games and literature. We give our thoughts on the media we've been enjoying, old or new, and we comment on anything topical. Joining me today, that's me, John, are Amy and Alex. And as always, we have an intro question, so say hello and please could you answer the following question. Okay, it's a classic, this one. Everyone has a book in them. If you were to write a book, what would it be about? Amy, do you need some time to think about this?
No, I know this one. I actually know this one. I remember when our daughter was very young, I used to come up with this story and she would complete the story for me. And it was all about a princess who everyone called Princess Smarty Pants, but only because she ate all the Smarties in Tesco's, because every time she went shopping, she would just raid all the chocolate by the checkouts. But her family said, let's try and get fit. So let's try. And then my daughter would suggest an athletic or energy type thing for exercise. And then I'd carry on the story. And in the end, everyone stopped calling her Princess Smarty Pants because she didn't eat all the Smarties anymore. That's the book I would write.
So hold on, is this like a sort of princess story and sort of self-help fitness book?
Yes, basically. Kind of for young children. However, obviously not called Princess Smarty Pants, as that already is a book.
Oh,
so it has to be something else. But Princess Snickers hasn't really got the same ring to it.
Well, it could get the wrong connotations if spoken too quickly as well, couldn't it, really?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Alex, how about you?
So mine would be a bit boring, actually, because it would probably be a book about my job. And
it wouldn't sell, then, would it? Would it sell, do you think?
Well, I think you're right, it might not sell. But
it's a niche market.
It is niche, but it's all about niche when you're doing books. You don't want to be mainstream. You want to service a niche. So I think for me, it would just be like, not nightmare stories of a product manager. And it would basically be all of the things that people do that they shouldn't do. And I would be like, don't do that. That's really stupid. Do this. And it's not original. Other people have done it similar, but I think it would probably give me a bit of a weight off my chest. So I'd feel...
Is it a tell-all confession book or is it a guide to do the right way, the right thing?
I think it's a bit of both, and probably a bit of therapy as well. I think it would probably be something that I'd write, and even if everyone just went, God, that's awful, I'd be like, look, I've written a book and it's great. I feel clear
therapy.
now. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah, it's therapy. Yeah,
I think that'll be.
Okay, that's interesting because that's quite a difference in the book between you and Amy, isn't it? That's quite interesting. You could start filling your bookshelf, couldn't you, with that? I have started writing a book.
Ooh.
Well, everyone says this, don't they? I before the kids, my other half and I went to Cambodia, and we had a very long journey on a boat up the Mekong to not the Mekong, the Tonle Sap, up to Sihanoukville in the north of Cambodia. It's about 8 or 9 hour journey on the boat, and I had a little notebook with me and started writing it as to pass the time. This is in the days before the internet, kids, and so it's a post Ice Age science fiction book about a girl who lives in a junkyard with her dad and goes on adventures and discovers all the kids are going missing, and it's about memory and abilities and DNA and saving the human race because everyone's dying at the age of sort of 25 from old age. Mm. So there's a bit of progeria mixed in there as well. And it's set in these mega cities underneath the ice after an ice age. So it's kind of a post-apocalyptic, post-environmental kind of story. And I've written about 10 chapters and stopped because life got in the way. So
now, John,
I'm trying to kind of nest egg it. Really.
I wouldn't be doing my job as a parent without saying, have you done your planning?
Yes.
Great.
I mean,
okay,
I've got that notebook from when I was in Cambodia with the characters and the idea of it being a trilogy.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And twists and turns. And whilst I was writing it, a friend of my father's is a geneticist, so I did a bit of research with him. But I think I still need to travel to France and do a bit of walking around Montmartre where it's set as well, because I want to add colour to it in detail and so on. But we can't really do that right now, can we? Travelling very well.
No, not quite.
Our government doesn't seem to care too much where we go, but
by the time it might come out, it may be different. So
I think by the time it comes out, it may well be an Ice Age, to be fair. Anyway, moving on. As people, maybe listeners will have guessed by now, our topic this week is going to be about reading. So we're going to be talking about what we are reading and what we have read, what we can recommend. Reading does not get bigged up enough in the media these days, I don't think. It's very much TVs and films, isn't it? So I think it's quite important that we do remember how important reading is, especially if you've got kids to read to them. But we're going to have a look at some great tomes today. And I think really to start off with, we should really chat about our general choice of book that we read. What sort of what's it, fiction, non-fiction, what sort of genre? So Amy, tell me what sort of books you're drawn to.
I like to go for fiction because that, for me, the point of reading is to get away from my real life and get involved in someone else's. And I like stories with good characters that pull me in. So on top of it being fiction, I am a primary school teacher. I don't think I've said that on Play Pause Turn before, but I am. And it's great. And my age range that I tend to teach tend to be somewhere between 8 and 11 years old. So I find myself quite often reading the kind of books that those children will read, because I find them really good fun. They normally have a bit of humour in it. They've got a good storyline. Unsurprisingly, no swearing or sex. And actually, I find it a good, fun, easy read. So I tend to go for books like that. And I mentioned briefly, just before we started, but for the benefit of our lovely listeners, I can't remember the exact number I said, but I think I've got about 31 books that I need to still read on my shelf.
That's your pile of shame, basically.
Yes, my massive pile of shame. I think I currently have more unread than I do read. But that probably just means I need to read a bit more.
That's a nice position to be in, all those unread books.
Very, very, very lucky. A lot of them are cast-offs from our child, but a lot of them are books that I've bought. So, for example, I have not yet read Beetle Boy, Who Let the Gods Out, or Wild Boy and the Black Terror.
That's a good recommendation for your kids there straight away. I'm currently reading my class, The Eternal Sea. Have you read that?
Ooh, no.
It's kind of like a sort of fantasy pirate powers romp through an alternative world that has London in it. I would say it's probably child-friendly steampunk. But I think
better make that 32 on my shelf.
It's called Eternal Seas by Lexi Reese. It's worth a read. It's part of the Relic Hunters. I think it's a trilogy. Most publishers demand trilogies these days, don't they? So
yeah.
If you're an aspiring writer, it's good to know.
You've either got to have a trilogy or got to be David Walliams. You've either got to have a trilogy or be David Walliams, I think.
I'm not a big fan of David Walliams myself.
Oh, neither am I. Maybe we'll talk about him later.
Maybe. Alex, how about you?
Okay. So that's the balance of the podcast. So I'm a bit of a sci-fi and fantasy nut, mostly sci-fi to be fair. So I love watching and listening to sci-fi. I'm also a big audiobooks listener rather than a reader. I do read sometimes, but because we don't commute anymore, I just don't have the time. Whereas putting something on background, I can do quite easily, so that's good. I generally read fiction. The only exception to that is an occasional biography, and one of those will be a part of the recommendations later. The other thing is I read a lot of books for work, so sort of self-help books and stuff to do with my job. It's probably explained why I thought, I can do that, because once you listen to a few of these, you kind of go, well, I could have told you that. That's not that difficult. But anyway, so mostly sci-fi, and there's a lot of authors to talk about for sci-fi, but we'll get on to that, because I'm sure that's something you and I can talk about a lot, John.
Well, yeah, I'm the same. I'm a big. I mean, sci-fi is my main genre, if not my only genre, and I do feel very bad about how narrow a perspective I have on the other types of fiction. I don't really read biographies either. The only other reading I do that's not novella reading is obviously comics and magazines. Well, I think comics have some really good narratives in them. We can talk about that in another podcast. Yeah, I like just like you, the escapism, and I like the questions that are posed in science fiction books, the what ifs. what if this happened and what if that happened? And I find that fascinating. And I wonder if science fiction will take an even further upturn in popularity after the lockdown, as a sort of escape from the reality of the world we're in at the moment. But I love sci-fi. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some books that we've read over the last 6 months. That was our stipulation, the last 6 months. And I'm quite impressed, actually, that I've managed to read this many books in 6 months, because like you, I have a little less time to read, Alex.
Yeah.
But I do try to. For me, a question I haven't asked either of you, I might ask this before we do our recommendations, because I think this is quite an interesting picture. So I'm going to drop you in it here a bit now, because this is not on our agenda. For you, could you describe the perfect place and situation where you like to read, or in your case, Alex, listen to an audiobook? So I'll give you an example. My perfect optimum position is I've got my nice comfy armchair in my living room. I put my feet up on a puff, and I turn on some nice ambient music on my speakers. And I have, the kids know when that happens, they leave the room. It's Daddy's quiet time. And I sit and I'll have a nice espresso next to me with a little slice of dark chocolate next to it. And that's my optimum reading position. How about you?
What a brilliant idea, John. That sounds really nice. I think I might borrow that. I wouldn't read. I'd just basically get everyone out of the room, and then I could play and do put my console on or whatever. I'd just like, no, it's Daddy's time. Leave me alone. Interesting. Audiobooks are a strange one for me because I listen to them while I'm doing stuff a lot of the time. I think for me, sometimes listening to audiobooks in the hot tub is always good. So outside, just an area of my own, just kind of go into a little bubble. That's kind of a place that I sometimes listen to audiobooks. It does make it interesting when Amy joins me in a hot tub, because I'll be listening to my book and then all of a sudden just have a leg come in. So it's like, right, okay. But
depends what sort of book you listen to, I guess, doesn't it? Really,
it's not those kind of books. The sci-fi books.
It's the book, the story of the tale of the killer leg. So that doesn't go down well.
Just a single leg floats past. That's quite scary.
Yeah,
really.
we could talk about. It'll be a tangent, but we could talk about what's it called? The Netflix robot series.
Love, Death and Robots.
Love, Death and Robots. That's it. Yeah, we can talk about that another time, but that because that's got limbs in it.
It has.
But we'll So no, most of the time it's nothing connected to that at all. But just somewhere to lose myself. And the hot tub is a good place for that.
How about you, Amy? Do you have a usual situation, or do you have like an ideal dream situation that you'd like to read?
I'm going to be really naughty and have 3.
Okay.
So the first is the one that I inherited as a child from watching The Neverending Story, where Bastian, or whatever his name is, is locked in school for whatever reason and manages to get upstairs to a really shoddy looking attic. I mean, the health and safety is a nightmare, but is there. But the idea of being somewhere like that, really old and woody, but comfy, on something comfortable to sit on with a big storm raging outside, that's scenario number 1. Scenario number 2 is the one that I think a lot of people have, which is just somewhere cosy to curl up in or stretch out in or sit up in with a cup of tea. And the third one is quite specific. It's the early 2000s. It is the large Starbucks that was on the corner of Leicester Square, round the corner from the Prince Charles Cinema.
Oh, yeah.
I'm there. That's where I am. A very long time ago, in a completely different life, I used to perform as part of a shadow cast to the Rocky Horror Picture Show at the Prince Charles Cinema almost every Friday night, Saturday night at midnight. I can't remember. But one of my things that I would do is I'd get into London, I have all my costume and stuff with me, and I'd go to that Starbucks. I'd get myself a big, like the biggest cup they did of steamed milk, and I'd get myself a strawberry lolly because it's great for dipping in a steamed milk, I tell you. And I'd go downstairs and I could be completely alone in that room full of people with my cuppa and my book. And I used to sit there and I used to read all the time before we did a show.
It's true what
so
they
that's
say, isn't
my
it?
other place.
You can get yourself lost in a book, can't you, completely? And
Yeah.
Your boundaries of your world disappear.
You can be in one of the
about them.
busiest cities in the world,
Yeah.
but you can still be lost in the book.
So tell me, Amy, since you're talking now, so tell me the first book or one of the books you'd like to recommend.
So, in the last 6 months, I've mainly read a series or part of a series, and I have banged on about it before. You've all tried to get me to be quiet, but today is my day where I finally get to talk about the wonderful series of Skullduggery Pleasant by Derek Landy. Ultimately, Skullduggery Pleasant, I'm going to try not to give any spoilers. He is a detective, and he deals in things that have to do with magic and sorcery. He has a sidekick who initially is a 12-year-old who is the niece of one of his previous associates. And she gets pulled into all this stuff. And it's absolutely brilliant. The characters are fantastic. I should probably mention that Skullduggery is a skeleton. A living skeleton.
Oh, right.
That's quite important. Basically, he was part of a large war between sorcerers that took place a very, very, very long time ago. And when he got killed, he was so angry about it, he came back. But at that point, he was a pile of bones, so he literally put himself back together and got on with it. So that's Skullduggery. And I absolutely love this series. I'm very pleased to announce there are 14 books in the series. I thought there were only 9, because the 9th book was very definitely the end. And then a friend of mine posted on Facebook at some ridiculous hour of the morning, something like 11:45 at midnight, to say, just got the new book. I'm like, oh my goodness, there's a new book. So I immediately went onto the Kindle, thought, right, I'm going to download this, I'm going to read it tomorrow. Downloaded it, started reading it, and said, the name of the first character that was mentioned in the book, and they were talking about this character like I should know who they were. I had no idea. It was then I realised that I'd missed 3 books. Oh, that was a late night. I got them all. I think I went to bed about 3 a.m.
So you read them there and then?
I didn't read them all. I started reading. And Derek Landy released the 14th book on the 1st of April this year. And that's been reading now.
I mean, I think that's quite impressive that you can write that many stories and keep people interested. Because
He's really good at twists.
Well, you get these franchises, don't you? My daughter was a big fan of, they're called the Warrior Cats books, and they're written by the author's a single name, but I think there's a whole kind of team of people that write it under her name, if that makes sense. And it's a big kind of money making franchise. But it sounds to me like Derek Landy, he writes them himself, and it's his own thing. And I think that's quite impressive to be able to come up with so many ideas, and keep people as excited about the releases now after 14 than the first few. That's quite impressive. And is that a children's book, or is it a teen book, or is it a grown-up book?
I'd say it's probably a teen. I'd probably recommend it from ages 8 or 9 upwards.
Right.
There's nothing awful in it. There's a little bit of kissing. But they turn out to be... I don't even want to say. I don't want to spoil it.
Can skeletons kiss? They got no lips.
It's not with a skeleton. It hasn't got any lips. What would you just knock teeth?
Yeah.
That'd be quite unpleasant. So yeah, they're really, really good. One of the things that I really love is the names. So there's an idea throughout these books that everyone has 3 names. I don't think this is a spoiler. So for example, John, you were named John at birth.
Yeah.
So that's one of your names. However, if I know magic, I can get you to do whatever I want by using your name. So I might say, John, just turn your computer off, and you would. Because you don't have power over that name. You've also got a name that you always had, a secret name that you don't know. And if someone has the information about that name, if someone has the information about that name, that would be quite catastrophic.
Right.
And then you have your taken name. So you can decide to ditch the name John and call yourself whatever you want.
Lord Laserthighs.
So, for example, there is a character in this book whose name, and this is whenever we, lovely Bobby, who we have on as well.
Yeah.
I always say to Bobby, you're one of my characters in my books. I'll finally reveal that Bobby reminds me of Ghastly Bespoke, who is a tailor, who's in the books. But of course, Ghastly Bespoke has chosen his own name, Bespoke, because he's a tailor, and Ghastly because, for one reason or another, he has scars all over his face. Everybody gets to choose their own names, and they're so descriptive. The baddie in the first book is Nefarian Serpine. Great! The names are superb.
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue nicely, isn't it, as well? Very melodic, very very sort of rhythmic, melodic name. Very clever.
Yeah, you got Tanith Lowe, you got Valkyrie Kane. You have some fantastic names in there, and so when you're introduced to a new character, you already get a little bit of a glimpse of what they might be like by their names.
Cool.
And what?
My daughter probably sets like she would like that. I think I might recommend those to her as well. Could cost me a fortune, that couldn't it? Sorry, Alex.
Oh, I was just going to say, what kind of world do they inhabit? What world are they in?
Dublin.
They're in Dublin. Oh,
They're in Dublin. So yeah, the source of magic in this realm is in Dublin, and it's called the Sanctuary. That's kind of like their government building. But there are sanctuaries around the world, and in charge of each sanctuary, generally they have like a high mage or the elders. There's some sort of governmental thing.
Really?
So yeah, they are. That's where they're based. In terms of the United Kingdom and things that are nearby us, our nearest base is probably Dublin. But it does take place all over the world because, of course, in the world of magic, you have people like teleporters who, as long as they've been to the Golden Gate Bridge, can take you to the Golden Gate Bridge.
Did Derek Landy write these books before J.K. Rowling? Or
do you know what? I don't know, but I'll find that out in the next few minutes. Oh, the first novel was 2007.
Yeah, afterwards.
So it's after.
So it's interesting because there was a big kind of explosion of sort of magic and sorcery books following J.K. Rowling, because obviously the written word, the industry has its trends, and even if you're a very good author and the genre that you're writing in is not currently popular, you might find it hard to get a book deal because a lot of the publishing houses look at what's going on and what's trending. What's trending in currently. So I always think it must be quite a hard deal for authors to get themselves known.
I think one of the big differentiators between the Skullduggery Pleasant series and the Harry Potter is the violence, first of all. Derek Landy really describes fights really well. I can tell you what Skullduggery's main move is because it comes up time after time. And it's all about they do this, they parry that, they block this, they roll there. And the children, I read this generally to my class each year, and they absolutely love it because as I'm reading it, I'm moving around. And you can see them moving around as well. They really get into it. But also the humour. It's brilliant because you've got these two slightly sarcastic people, and the typical interchange will be Skullduggery saying to Stephanie, "You're really annoying. Do you know that?" And she'll say, "I know," and that's great. Or she'll say, "Did you not do a speech?" And he'll go, "Of course I did, and it was me, so it's brilliant. What else were you expecting?"
A little bit of an Irish lilt in that as well. I heard that.
Well, the thing is, I do lots of voices when I read to the children in my class, and I remember the first time I read it, getting about 2 pages in and realising it was all set in Dublin, and my brain going, "Oh, pants." Oh, pants. So Stephanie, to be fair, travels all the way around that island. Her voice, her accent goes everywhere, but generally it's Irish.
Oh, that sounds really cool. Thank you for that, Alex. To kind of make a big jump between genres now.
God, yeah, this is going to be a big one. Well, okay. So my recommendation is Project Hail Mary, which was written by Andy Weir. It's only recently come out, actually, only in the last couple of weeks. I devoured it, as I think you did as well, didn't you, John?
I've not read this one.
Oh, okay.
He's the Martian guy, isn't he, Andy Weir?
Yes, I have to be careful with spoilers then.
I think I've got Artemis somewhere to read. I haven't read that yet either, which is one of his, isn't it, Artemis?
So he wrote Artemis and the Martian.
Yeah.
I think it's better than Artemis, but not as good as the Martian.
Okay.
I think they're very different books, but one of the things that Andy Weir does really well is he writes it in a kind of scientific narrative. It's very
it's very grounded, isn't it?
Very grounded, but it's also just like, well, to get from A to B, I had to think about what I had to actually use, and this was broken, so I had to think about that, and this wasn't working, so we had to go to here, and then I made it work, and so you're kind of going through the mental process that the protagonist is. So that's his writing style, and it's very similar in this respect. So I'll tell you a little bit about it. The plot for this is that there is a school teacher. His name's Ryland Grace. He's a high school science teacher in the US. And he basically had had a career as a molecular biologist. I wrote a thesis, and then sort of just said, "Oh, I'm done with this." His thesis didn't go down very well.
Did he publish it?
He did, yeah. He published it,
so
and
it's out in the general world for people.
Yeah, it was out in the general world, and it's a little bit of a crackpot thesis, and so he got laughed out a bit, and he was just like, "Right, I'm done with biology. I'm going to go to be a high school teacher." And he's kind of he's a bit like you, John. He's kind of your cool high school teacher.
I'm a teacher too, by the way, folks. If I hadn't said that already, sorry.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. I think you might like him.
Okay.
Either that, or you'll be like, I'm not like that at all. But anyway, and so he then gets called up because there's this big calamity that's going to affect the Earth. And I think I can probably spoil. I can tell you a little bit. Basically, there is a microbe which eats the sun, is the best way to describe it, or eats part of the sun. So, and the thing is, it's like, if that happened, the sun's output would be reduced, and we would very quickly starve and go into an ice age. So much like your book, John. So this is really, this could be good research.
Yeah.
Anyway, so and then the thing is, then they go through a whole set of procedures of like, look, what can we do to solve this problem? And they talk through the interesting properties of the microbe. They go on a rescue mission, which they need a spaceship, the spaceship is called the Hail Mary. I'm not sure I'm very keen on the naming, but maybe he just ran out of cool Latin examples and just went, call it the Hail Mary, and that was it. So but anyway, so so he goes on and he ends up going on that. What's interesting about it is it's told real time, roughly, but it also has lots of flashbacks. So what happens is that in some chapters you'll kind of get a flashback which will paint how he got there, and then you'll come back and he'll be like, whoa, okay, and then you'll see that changing his outlook of what he did. I have to be so careful not to spoil this, because I think that's honestly as far as I can take you without spoiling it. But all I can say is he goes on a long trip, and that's it. But yeah, it's really interesting. I would recommend, if you like audiobooks, I'd recommend the audiobook, because it's slightly different in the audiobook to the written word.
What do you mean?
It's to do with what you hear,
right.
But I can't really explain that. I'll tell you offline when I just don't want to spoil it for you, because if you do listen to it, it's quite cool. But anyway, yeah. So if you enjoy audiobooks, it's not bad to listen to the audiobook, and it's well narrated. The one I heard is narrated by Ray Porter, who's a very good. I don't know what the right word is. Audio
narrator.
Audio narrator.
Yeah, audio actor.
Well, he's famous for doing audiobooks, you mean? Or
Yes.
Voiceover artist? No, maybe
not.
Yeah.
Actor and audiobook narrator. That, if it's good enough for Wikipedia, it's good enough for me. I thought this was a really solid book, so I think this is definitely one to one to listen to or one to watch. And the direction that it goes is not how I expected it. So that's all I can say. And once you've listened to it, John, we can talk about this a bit more, and then we can maybe have a digest and understand the goods and the bads.
Club. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but yeah, I really would enjoy it. I recommend it. So, John?
I think we should do this as round robin, so we have more to talk about, don't we? But I'll talk about a book I've recommended.
It's to you, yeah.
So the first one I want to talk about is a book called The Galaxy and the Ground Within by Becky Chambers. Now, Becky Chambers, again, is an author I'm a big fan of. She's written a series of books in what's called the Wayfarer series. The first one she wrote in 2015 called The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. And I think initially she kick-started this book, allowing her to raise enough money so that she could work part-time to finish her book, which I think is really interesting. She wanted to find a regular publisher, but I think she was working on a backup plan of self-publication. Eventually, it was published by Hodder and Stoughton in 2015. So obviously, it garnered enough interest, and it's very much my thing. The Wayfarers, the books are set in the same universe, but they are completely disparate to each other in terms of what goes on. There's no sort of over big arc or the story arc. It's just that the species, science fiction, obviously, the species within each of these books are defined species that you are become aware of over the books, and their cultures feature in each of the books. And the first one is very much my bag, which is, and I do love this sort of genre of science fiction, which is a ragtag crew on a ship going somewhere. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. There's another whole series of books called With the Shadow Captain books, which are really good as well. The Bone, I don't remember what they're called now. I'll look it up later on. But I do like kind of like a new person arriving in a crew, finding their way and learning to be friends with these people. So yes, they're a really good series, and they're really worth recommending reading them. I did spend an entire year only reading books by female authors.
Oh, right.
She was one of the ones I discovered, just to kind of move away from the usual, middle class white or male authors. And the most recent one, again, what I like about her books is that you don't know what you're going to get next, but you are familiar with the species within them. Is really interesting, and I think I haven't looked up the background of the book too much, but I think it was written. I get the feeling, because it was released in 2021, that it was written during lockdown, because the themes inside the book they almost matched almost perfectly to how we've all been feeling. And the story is set on this kind of outpost planet which is kind of a hub between one place and another. It's not a very nice place. It's a kind of a rock, really, with stopping points. A bit like a sort of space version of a motel or a motorway. And it's set in this kind of hostel for pilots, hosted by these two, a mother and daughter of a certain species. And you get introduced to other pilots who are landing there, and whilst they're all landed and staying in a hostel, something happens over in space above them. They're in a dome, and they become not stranded as such, but they can't leave where they are. So it's a bit like you're in a hotel or a hostel, and a tsunami kicks or something, and you can't leave. And the whole story, it's really, really interesting. The whole story is set around these different species learning about each other's cultures whilst isolated in this one place. And they go back to their spaceships now and then, and it's a good way of narratively of them kind of mulling over what they've been discussing in private. But it's what I found so charming about the book is the level of detail of she's built these cultures, these are alien cultures, and there's no humans in the story whatsoever. Every species is one's slightly humanoid, but there's no Earth humans. So you're learning about each of these cultures, and they're wildly different. One character is sort of insectoid, and one is communicates through colour rather than sound. And it's about them learning to love each other in this situation for their differences, and dealing with being on their own, missing loved ones who they can't get to. And it really struck a chord with me, of kind of reminding me of us all sitting here on our computers, Zooming or Teamsing each other, Microsoft Teams each other, while stuck at home, but still communicating with friends through a screen. And it's just the detail of their lives it goes into, and discovering each other's, whether it's a religion or a way of how the society deals with roles and jobs in life. It's really, really interesting. She
puts a lot of depth into building the not the world, but the galactic universe,
people.
Galactic Commons.
Have you read any of her books?
And what I like about it, about the worlds that she creates, is that they're very respectful of other species. Like it's basically like, well, of course you'd be conscious of how other species aren't the same as you, which I thought was really good. And she really has thought through the differences and some of the challenges that you'd have.
Exactly that. I mean, I think there's so many allegories that can be drawn here. I mean, there's in one of her books, A Closed and Common Orbit, it's about a ship's artificial intelligence loading herself into an android body and dealing with her own identity in this new form, because obviously initially the ship's computer was built like a slave, really. You do what we tell you on a spaceship, and she basically becomes independent and deals with. It's a bit like dealing with your sexuality. Are you which way you steer that way as well? And I think that was really interesting, because people who perhaps are transgender or deciding on their gender would read one of these books and understand what this android is going through, this artificial intelligence is going through, and dealing with relationships. You're right, and I think the fact that she creates such complex characters and such likable characters, and celebrating their weaknesses, but also kind of just enjoying the minutiae of their lives rather than these big overarching. I mean, I love lots of space operas and these science fiction epic stories, and we'll talk about this later on. But I like the sort of microscopic detail that she puts into these people's lives. So I would really recommend, if you like human interest science fiction rather than space fights and lightsaber battles, this is a very good series as a kind of a tonic to standard science fiction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd say it's very a refreshing read.
Yes.
I haven't quite finished it. It's just wrapping up at the moment. So. But yeah, no, it's good. I think what I would say is that the plot line isn't always forefront. Like there's a lot of explanation. But what I was surprised by was actually the emotion that you actually got at the end of it, like towards the end, because there's an event that kind of culminates. And I was actually surprised at the depth of that. So I was kind of like, this is really good.
It's a lovely,
touching,
charming book, isn't it? Yeah, it's very touching. Amy, have you got anything else you'd like to recommend?
Yes. So during lockdown, I felt it was really important that our children were still being read to in class. So I picked up a book that I'd read the year before to another class. And I think a really good sign of a great book for young people is one where when you finish reading, they all are really cross that you stopped. And I say, why? No more! And so the book that I'm going to recommend now is called Wild Boy. It's written by a middle-aged white man called Rob Lloyd-Jones. And what I love about Wild Boy is it's not science fiction and fantasy so much. It's set in the Victorian era, and it's about a wild boy. So it talks about freak shows as well. So this is a boy who's covered in hair, and he's in a freak show. His circus master or his sideshow master is horrible. So the descriptions of him are really vile. He's just a nasty guy. He treats Wild Boy terribly. But Wild Boy witnesses a murder. And the people at the nearby circus don't really like the freak show people. So they blame Wild Boy for the murder. Obviously, it wasn't him. So Wild Boy has to go on the run. And he takes with him someone else from there, Clarissa, who is an acrobat at the circus. So the thing is, they've now got all of London after Wild Boy and this acrobat girl. So they have to use what talents they've got and what resources they have to try and figure out who the killer is before they get strung up.
So it's a bit of a detective story as well, then, is it?
Very much. It's a murder mystery for children, and it introduces them to that world. What I loved about it is, as I was reading, we had like our chat open on the chat, because this is all done online. And I had 30 kids basically messaging each other on this chat saying, well, he's sus, well, that's sus, well, it can't be him. That's extremely sus. Oh no, I can't believe that happened. And I was getting a live commentary of exactly what these children were thinking about the book as I was reading it. Something else I love about it is it talks a bit about what life was like in the Victorian times. It's very exciting because sometimes they nearly get caught, sometimes they nearly catch the actual murderer. Spoiler, it wasn't Wild Boy. But one thing that I really loved about it is at the end, the children went from going, "Rah, I can't believe it, I'm really cross and angry, let's kill that person," to actually crying. I had children in tears at how emotional it got at the end, and completely changing the way that they looked at the book. So I think it's a great read for young people. I'd say, again, probably eight upwards. A great introduction to murder mysteries because it does keep you guessing.
I think it's great that these children's books now, there's a massive explosion of good quality books, are doing a really good job of introducing probably quite grown-up genres to children in enjoyable ways.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a particularly grisly scene where the two children, should we call them, are investigating. They're young teenagers, really, in my mind. Yeah. And they're investigating a site that the police haven't been able to get into. But obviously, when you have an acrobat by your side, you can get into these places.
Yeah.
And it's full of cadavers.
Which is quite gruesome, really, for kids.
It is. It's full of corpses that are there for medical reasons, for training. And something horrible happens there. But the children were absolutely hooked. And it does introduce them to these scenes and scenarios. But it's as grisly as their mind makes it, and they can filter it down rather than being put in front of a film and being subjected to it. And that's one of the things I love about books. It's that the reader will apply their own filter to the situation.
Well, yes, I mean, you've got books like Wonder and The Boy at the Back of the Class as well, which can really introduce quite difficult concepts and quite upsetting ideas to children, but kind of wrap them in a world they can deal with and understand and sympathise with. And I think that's really clever.
Yeah.
And I think, again, children's books are really underrated. I think people can be quite snooty about them, but they are so important to make young readers become older readers.
Yeah. Well, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I'm keeping track of all these books so we can put them into notes. So if you are listening, look in the show notes. We'll put all those books in there as well so you can find them. Sorry, carry on, Amy.
Well, going back to Skydog Pleasant, it covers a lot of other things, like what happens when refugees are trying to escape, albeit a parallel dimension. But what happens? Do we offer them somewhere to be? How do we deal with these very different people coming and being here because they need the help? So, this covers a lot of frank topics. There are, again, I don't want to give too much away, but what happens if the allegedly most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, starts getting help from magic people?
Ooh.
That's a conspiracy.
If it had been Donald Trump, we'd have been scuppered, wouldn't we, really?
This is it. It's definitely, absolutely, positively not meant to be Donald Trump, I'm sure. But it was written at the same time of him being a horrible person. So who knows?
He's ever immortalised in children's fiction. I don't know how I feel about that, really. Alex, how about you? What's your second recommendation?
So it's a little bit of dystopia. This is The Last Day by Andrew Hunter Murray. And this is what would happen if the world stopped spinning. Like physically stopped spinning. So, which is an interesting thought.
We'd all fall over.
Well, no, but you'd think so. But let's just assume that like gravity still works.
Well, gravity doesn't work from spinning. Gravity works from mass.
Yes,
isn't it?
Exactly. So,
otherwise, that scene at the end of Superman where he reverses the spin on the Earth to go back,
fling
to
everyone out, wouldn't they?
Exactly. It'd all fall off, wouldn't we? So,
well, there we go. So, but yeah, this is what happens if the world stops, and so it takes us forward about 30 years from today. So it's kind of 2060 is, I think, when they set it. And what happens is that basically sort of parts of the world, it didn't just stop instantly. It slowed to a stop over sort of 20 years. So what happened was, for a while everyone was like, oh yeah, that'll be fine. It's a bit weird, but all right. and then all of a sudden they sort of started to realise that, you know, nations that were in areas of complete darkness or complete sunshine couldn't, you know, weren't really inhabitable anymore. So there's huge displacement of people.
Wow, it kind of changes the whole sort of socio-economic structure of the
Totally,
world.
yeah, and it's just the only sort of habitable places are on the fringes. So they're places where it's like, you know, dawn or dusk, because that's like a comfortable temperature and it's not too hot, not too
Yeah.
cold. It just happens that part of the UK is in that, so that's helpful. Yeah,
That's
it's a
lucky.
funny, very convenient. But it makes for some interesting reading because the US isn't. And so they talk a little bit about how that worked. And the main character is a scientist, and I can't remember her name now, Ellen Hopper. So she's a scientist on an ocean rig around the coast of the UK, because obviously, you know, currents have completely changed due to this, and so she's one of the sort of few people who's sort of keeping an eye on stuff like this, and then she gets caught in a conspiracy with her old lecturer, who's on his deathbed and calls her to London. So she goes to London and finds out about the conspiracy and gets involved in that. But you know, whilst doing that, you get to find out a lot more about how it would work, the sort of decay of civilization to an extent. The US, for example, has sort of some people from the US have decamped to Dorset, which
As you do.
is fair enough. But like they've taken the whole county, and probably some of like Cornwall and stuff.
Of course, a lot of quaint tea shops that are going to be out of business, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool,
Yeah.
dear.
So so it's a really interesting premise, and it's quite grounded for quite a bit of it. And then it goes through the conspiracy and talks a little bit more about that. But yeah, no, I thoroughly recommend it. I think it's a good listen and gets you thinking. And I don't mind a bit of dystopia. I think it's quite good for you.
Oh, I'm quite partial to dystopia. Now looking at my Kindle, because I've been looking at these books on my Kindle, on the Kindle store, as you both have recommended them. I did actually buy this book on the 23rd of May, 2020. Almost exactly a year ago today, as we record this. So it's in my pile of shame. So obviously, I think perhaps you maybe recommended it to me a year ago, Alex.
I think I might have.
Before you read it. So yes, it's actually a very reasonable price on the Kindle store right now. If you, I know that's for a lot of authors, that's a horrible thing to say. Don't buy it from Amazon. Go local to your local shop. But I think making books accessible to everyone's really good. I will look forward to reading that. Okay, my second recommendation, I don't read a lot of these sort of books, is an anthology book. I really like the idea of this book. So they've released 2 of these so far, these books, as a celebration of 40 years of Star Wars. So this is a Star Wars related book. It's actually called, it's second of 2. The first one was called Star Wars, From a Certain Point of View. And the second one, as you might have guessed, is called The Empire Strikes Back, from a certain point of view. And what's really clever about this is it's an anthology of stories from the point of view of other characters in those films. And it follows the complete narrative of the Star Wars films from start to finish. In this case, for The Empire Strikes Back. But each of the stories, the anthology stories, happen alongside the main heroes. So you don't interact with the main heroes very often, if at all. There's a couple of references to them. But it's the people in the background. And what's really clever is, if you watch the films, you can see those people in the films in the background, and they refer to them in these stories. Right. And there's some very, very clever... I'm getting goosebumps now. Very clever little twists in the stories that make everything fit together really cleverly with the film. So in the first book, There's the scene in the trash compactor when Luke and Han and Leia and Chewie are getting crushed by the walls, and Luke gets dragged under by this sort of creature in the water. So in the books, and I'm going to spoil the first one a little bit here, the story is from the point of view of the creature in the trash compactor.
Brilliant.
And the creature in the trash compactor is a Force-sensitive creature as well, which is really interesting. But obviously, Empire Strikes Back. There's some lovely stories from the point of view of the Wampa, the one that kidnapped Luke and hung him upside down, and it's about his family living in the ice caves and how they're being disturbed by the rebels landing and cutting through their ice caves to have for their rebel base. And there's a story from the point of view of the Tauntaun herder, so the guy who looks after the Tauntauns in the hangar. And there's a lot of stories from the point of view of the Imperials as well, and some Imperials wrestling with being the baddies, calling up like that sketch from what's that funny show with the two guys from Peep Show? What's it called?
Mitchell and Webb.
Yeah, there's that famous clip that gets.
Are we the baddies?
Viral. Are we the bad? Hold on, are we the baddies? So there's a lot of stories from the point of view of the Imperials. It's really, really good. As a Star Wars fan, I love it. I love the detail and the background. In the first book, the Star Wars book, you had from a point of view of another droid on the Jawa droid collecting tank thing that goes to the desert, seeing R2-D2 and C-3PO leaving and him being stuck with the Jawas still. So it's really some really clever stories that tie up all sometimes the plots in between. There's one character in the Empire Strikes Back book, which is the character that walks between Han and Leia in that corridor when they're arguing and they're about to kiss. You'll see him if you watch the film. Right. He sort of squishes, and he's a gay character whose job is to deliver coffee to all the different areas in Hoth Base, and how he gets to know everybody, and how he's like this kind of unrequited love with the Tauntaun herder, and how in the end he becomes a bit of a hero as they're evacuating the ice caves on Hoth. It's really, really clever and charming and compelling stories. Again, much more about the people than the action and the events. And I wonder if I've become a bit of I focused on these a lot more after lockdown. I don't know, just people and seeing people. But really, really would recommend that. And the book, some of the authors you may have heard of. I know Gary Whitta is one of the authors, the guy who wrote Rogue One. Some of these are people like there's Charles Yu, there's Jim Zub, who's he's a comic book writer as well. Cavan Scott, who is also writing some of the new High Republic books and comics.
Oh, right.
And a few others that I could probably recommend if I knew who they were. They're all really good quality. There's even one, just a single page cartoon panel from one of the authors about the Tauntauns as well, which is very funny. So it's really worth a read. But the proceeds of the book go to charity as well. So the authors have all written for free. And I'm just trying to find what the charity is for the book. So here we go. So all participating authors have forgone any compensation for their stories, and their proceeds get donated to what's a charity called First Book, which is a leading non-profit that provides new books, learning materials, and other essentials to educators and organisations serving children in need. And then I think Random House, Penguin Random House, is also donating $100,000 to First Book, and also Disney and Lucasfilm are all donating 100,000 children's books valued at $1 million to support First Book as well. So it's a really, really interesting cause, and good to know that the book that I've really enjoyed and read is helping other people read as well, which is really good.
No, that's very good.
And I would imagine, having had the first two, that there will be Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view coming out at some point next year, I imagine.
Yeah, that sounds cool.
So yeah, it's great, again, because it's an anthology, and because my time is precious in terms of when I can read. You can pick it up and read a couple of the short stories and put it down and come back to it, without feeling like you're neglecting the story, which is really good as well.
Yeah, that's good.
It's really good.
I was going to say, yeah, I'm just looking at it on Audible as well. And then on Audible, there's sort of an ensemble cast that will do the reading of the chapters. Neil Patrick Harris is in it as well. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what he reads, but I just that was a buy.
I bet he's an Imperial.
Maybe I'll have to let you know. But yeah, so that sounds awesome. Sounds really good.
Yeah, really worth a read. Amy, do you have any other books you'd like to recommend?
I'm going to leave it there. All I will say is, for anyone who's looking into Skullduggery books, if you're looking for it on a Kindle, before you go ahead and buy books 1 and then book 2 and book 3,
Is there a bundle?
they do have bundles,
Yeah.
and the bundles are really good value. So if you're looking to get that on the Kindle, that's a good way of doing it.
That's good advice. Now, Alex, you have a final third book.
I've got one more. Go on.
No, I'm quite interested by this because this is quite a departure from what we've been talking about.
Well, the thing is, I've got sci-fi books that I could recommend coming out of my ears, but I can't keep just doing that. So this is a book, a political book. It's Barack Obama's A Promised Land, which is the first one of 2 memoirs that he's writing about his time in the White House. I had read his previous book as well, because he's written a couple of books before. He's quite wordy in his previous books, but this book reads a lot more like a spoken memoir of like here's the challenges that I had, here's where I did okay, here are the problems that I had. And he does allude to some of the challenges that he would have with the following president, but he doesn't get to that point. So his kind of the way he's done it, he's kind of split it in 2. So I was just getting to some really juicy bits about the end of his first term, and then it's kind of like, and we'll cover that in the next book. I was like, damn it.
So there's more than one.
So there is another book to follow this, yeah.
Ka-ching.
It is, I mean, it's a long book. So it's 28 hours, the audiobook, which is quite long. But I don't mind listening to it, because what you realise is that, he was, clearly he was a principled man who had some really good ideas, but he also happened to be there at the right moment, and he had the right people and organizations and stuff behind him and his cause in order to become president. It wasn't just he was lucky. It was like, no, behind that there was a whole body of stuff that needed to make sure that it would succeed.
Wasn't he quite savvy with his whole sort of digital social media campaign? Wasn't he wasn't he like the first quite famous politician to take advantage of social media in terms of
so he was,
spreading the word?
But for him it was like he absolutely was, but for him it was a mechanism for him to engage supporters.
Yeah.
And what in his memoirs he talks about a previous attempt to get like in the Senate which fell on its face, like it completely failed, and he had some hard learnings to come from that, and then that meant that the next time that he went down that route, he was much more savvier. I think also the other thing that you find when you listen to the memoirs is he just hired good people. Like he found people that he trusted who knew what they were doing, and he just said, like, run with this, and once he got them, it really did help turn things around. And so I think that's the thing, you kind of initially think of it solely as him, whereas I think really it's he was just one person in a movement that ended up culminating with him being president. And then of course once you're president, you then got all the work to do. So it's not, you don't go, oh great, I'm done. It's like a whole business that carries on.
He always struck me as someone who had some great ideals that were slightly stymied by the system around him.
Yes, and he talks about that.
Hard.
Yeah, he does talk about that, and he talks about his frustrations. But I think the thing is, you have to decide whether to play the system or not. And I think the way he handled it was by playing it by its rules. So he kind of, knowing what the rules are, he would say, well, look, how can I achieve this then? And it would be like, you have to do it this way. And I think actually he made more compromises than perhaps we realise. We kind of have this principled idea of him, but actually, in reality, a lot of the end results weren't as good. And he does talk about that a bit in this, about certain things. So it's actually a really good listen. It's something I had in the background while I was working for a few weeks, and it is very good. And it also talks a lot about his relationship with Michelle, and the tensions that come from that. Because the thing is, it's not just you going into politics; it's your whole family going into politics and being dragged in, kicking and screaming. It's not necessarily like they're all in for this stuff, but they had to show that support because that's very important in politics. Less so in the UK. Like in the UK, it doesn't seem to matter if your wife hates your job and doesn't criticize you or whatever. But in the US, that's like be all and end all. But anyway,
I would say at the moment our current leader has had quite a lot of problems with his other half.
Yeah.
In terms of politics, but yeah,
it's a funny thing. I don't know, but it's just the thing is in the US you have a your whole part of it is your character like that. Yeah. You're on the bill and you're the one. And although that's happens in the UK, the weird thing is in the UK we kind of go, yeah, but it's not really about that. And then they go, okay, well, who are you going to vote for? Oh, I'm going to vote for Boris. And you're like, well, you're not voting Conservative. Oh yeah, same difference. It's the same thing. And it's like, so I think the nice thing about the US is it's more implicit. It's like, yeah, you're voting for that person, and that's who you're voting for. And I kind of wish we had that clarity in politics a bit.
Which is why they place so much, I think, emphasis on the personality of their presidents, really, isn't it, over there, more than anything else, just to make it kind of easier for the populace to understand in some respects.
Yeah, totally. But I do think that, it ultimately comes down to, policies and getting support in the party. Yeah. And if you can't do that, then you can't get anywhere. And I think that's the weird bit about UK politics is that we kind of have that back to front. We kind of have policies and then we have the people. But I don't know. It's just a difference in how things work.
I think we could talk a long time about that.
We could. I'm going to leave it there though. Yeah. But I definitely recommend it. So it's worth listening to.
So my last recommendation today is by quite a well-known author. I'm sure you've heard of Peter F. Hamilton, Alex?
Yes. Yeah, yes.
He's been around for a while. He has written a lot of books. He wrote the early books, the Greg Mandel books, are kind of become almost classics now, haven't they, really?
Yes, yeah.
I would say Peter F. Hamilton is second only for me in terms of authors I love to Ian M. Banks. I'm a big Ian M. Banks fan, and Peter F. Hamilton has a similar feel to it. I think he writes highly detailed, super advanced future sci-fi, but with kind of sprawling politics and world building. And what he's very, very good at is building up a story, a big story over a long time that becomes clear. You understand what's going on in the final of a trilogy. He's very clever at dropping little hints and clues as to what's going on in his stories, that you have that kind of moment at the end of the final book. Now, you do have to have some patience with that, but the payoff is so good. And I think I was first drawn to him with his Night's Dawn trilogy. Right. With the book The Reality Dysfunction, which is a big book, which is space opera. I do like a bit of space opera. I didn't really know what it was about until I bought it. And it's a very strange idea. Have you read this one, Alex?
No, so I've not read this one. I need to go I'm
really
just trying to
good.
work out which one's the first one.
So the Reality's Dysfunction is the first, then you've got the Neutronium Alchemist, and then you've got the Naked God.
Right.
And the plot, see, it sounds really ridiculous, but again, he makes it so believable and like, oh right, okay, that makes sense. And it's basically centered on the souls of the dead coming back from the beyond to possess the living, and the living fighting back, but with a science fiction slant. It's really clever. And there's some pretty mind-bending stuff in it. And it's really worth a read. Now, they're really good, and they're a really good entry into his books. The earlier books are very much kind of a collection of smaller ideas. Following that, there was a short story he wrote called The Misspent Youth, and the whole theme behind that, which is a bit like Alter Carbon, is a near future version of Britain where rejuvenation and memory storage is a thing. So you can you can upload your brain into a memory chip, and when you die, your body can be replaced with a clone, and you just download your memory back in, which is very much like Alter Carbon. But the Commonwealth Saga has that kind of, it basically riffs on the idea of misspent youth. It's actually set in the same universe, but it kind of explores the social effects of no longer having death. Everyone's kind of immortal, and how does that affect crime and politics and the world around them, and the rich and the poor, because obviously the really wealthy can, again, very much like Alter Carbon, can afford clones and the poor can't. And there's a lot of stories in his a lot of different series of books, and like you said, it can become a bit confusing unless you have a bibliography of where to start. And I have, because I've been reading them as they've come out. I've been lucky enough to read them in order. But the book I want to recommend is his most recent trilogy called The Salvation Sequence, and they are set in two different timelines. The future and the very, very far future. And I don't want to give too much away, but basically there's a problem that happens from visiting aliens, which has massive consequences for the human species. And then the other storyline is the aftermath. It's the main conceit is people can travel via quantum spatial entanglements. They have portals that let them travel long distances, so that has a big effect on commerce and trade and so on. But it also has an effect on crime as well, and assassination. If you can jump, long distances and escape the scene. And they're really, really well written. They're sexy. They're dangerous. They don't hold back. They're the opposite of what Amy likes. They have lots of sex and swearing in them. But I don't think they're gratuitous. I don't think they're exploitative. They make you enjoy and love the characters. You do have to sometimes go back to the list of characters. Here's like a list of characters, like a dramatic, the play script has all the characters in it, so you know who's what. Because if you come back to the book after a year of it, the last one, it's very hard to follow what's going on. You have to kind of remind yourself. Now, I've read this Salvation Sequence 3 or 4 times,
right?
And I tend to, if a new book comes out of a trilogy, go back and read the first 2 books again before I start the third one, so it's fresh in my mind. If that makes sense. It's very well written, really cool characters, some wonderful kind of set piece action sequences. It's your big budget film, sci-fi film storyline.
Can I? I mean, no, it sounds awesome. I think there are so many Peter F. Hamilton books. And so it can be a bit intimidating to get into it. The only Peter F. Hamilton book I got into was Great North Road.
That's a great book as well.
Which is such a good
it's
book.
A slow burner, that one, isn't it?
It is, but it's basically it's
really
a
clever
Newcastle procedural cop sort of thing, but based around different worlds and things like that. But yeah, again, really slow burn, but it's just really good listen. But yeah, I'll have to try Salvation and let you know.
Well, I would start with the Night's Dawn trilogy.
Okay.
He's done another trilogy called the Void trilogy, which is very out there but really clever.
I think I worked my way up to that.
Yeah, that's. I mean, they're really well written, really clever. But I'd start with the Night's Dawn trilogy, and then you'll find to jump to the Salvation sequence.
Okay.
And enjoy that as well. Yeah. But I would say it's not hard science fiction, but it's proper. It's a proper space opera.
Yeah, I'd sort of say high sci-fi, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So
yeah. If you're an Ian M. Banks fan and you've read the books like Consider Phlebas, which is an amazing novel, this is a kind of a similar feel to it. If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's how you pronounce it. Phlebas. I don't know. I've never known, and I've actually sat and listened to Ian Banks read one of his books when I was at university. One of my high points in my life, that, because he's no longer with us. Lovely, sort of very jolly, sweary, happy Scottish guy, a great reader of books. Now, I've got a bit of a silly question coming up here, because I think we'd all recommend these books for purchase, and we have done whilst we've been talking about it. And we've also mentioned some of the other books that these authors have recommended. We've recommended other authors as well. So I think we'll move on from that. We've covered quite a lot here. And finally, Amy, you've talked about your pile of shame. Is there one particular book that you've either got on your pile of shame or you're yet to buy that you're really looking forward to? I think that's a good place to finish. Amy's just rifling through her library now.
I'm not going to cheat and say the 15th book in the Skullduggery series, which comes out next year, so I won't say that. I think one that I really want to read, and I'm literally scanning all of the books now, I think probably Who Let the Gods Out. I hear loads about it. It's a book by Maz Evans, and it's really well rated, but I haven't read it yet. I've bought it. It sits there in my pile of shame, being shameful, but I do want to read that. I've got no idea what it's about. So this is the worst review ever. Here's a book, I've not read it yet, and I don't know what it's about, but I'm going to, and when I do, I'll tell you about it on here.
Is that Maz Evans?
Maz, M-A-Z, Maz Evans, Who Let the Gods Out.
Okay. So it's kind of a mysterious recommendation, that.
It is. Join me as I take it from my bookshelf and have a look to see what it says in the back.
Folks.
Oh, very exciting. Okay, it says, when Elliot wished upon a star, he didn't expect a constellation to crash into his dung heap. I love it already. Virgo thinks she's perfect. Elliot doesn't. Together they release... Now, I've done a silly thing here. I've got weird words. Together they release Thanatos, evil demon of death. Epic fail. They need the king of the gods and his noble steed. They get a chubby Zeus and his high horse Pegasus. Are the gods really ready to save the world? And is the world really ready for the gods? Well, that sounds quite good fun, actually.
That could work.
So, yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that a little bit more than I was looking forward to it before.
Yeah, I presume, is that another children's book as well, yeah?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, I find there's a really good website, Books Trust, will tell you a little bit about the books, but it also will give you a bit of an age rating as well.
Okay. Sounds good. That's a good thing to do, actually, isn't it? Because as a parent, you're always looking at those sort of details, aren't you?
Well, yeah, and they have two ratings as well. They've got a reading age, so a child of the age of 9 or whatever will be able to read this. But they also have an interest age, because there are some books that a 6-year-old would love, but might be a bit heavy-handed for them to read themselves. It's great to read with a parent.
Awesome, thank you. That sounds good. How about you, Alex? Any final looking forward to recommendations?
So I've got one on my guilty pile that I need to listen to. It's Red Rising by Pierce Brown. It's the Red Rising series, and yeah, this is another sci-fi. Basically, I think classes are measured by colour. So you're in the red caste or gold caste, and that kind of thing. And I believe that they're all on Mars. And that
sounds very Aldous Huxley, this.
Yeah, a little bit.
Brave New World on Mars.
I think, the thing is, it's one of those things that sat in my library. I've downloaded it and I just couldn't get into it. And then a family member said, "Oh yeah, I've got that," and I was like, "That rings a bell. Why does that ring a bell?" And then I was like, "Oh, I downloaded it and never listened to it." So so I think that might be my next listen.
Ooh, okay. I'll put that on my list, I think. I'm a big fan of another author I'm sure you've heard of called Neil Stevenson. He's written things like this Diamond Age and Snow Crash. And I think he might have been the person that coined the word meme. Although I could be wrong.
All right.
Although he called it genetic memes, like a meme. But he's got a book which he released in 2015 that I've not read called Seven Eves. And the reason I was drawn to it was on Barack Obama's list of books that he's read, and it's a hard science fiction novel. So it's steeped in difficult science, a bit like Liu Cixin's books, and it tells the story of desperate efforts to preserve the human species in the wake of apocalyptic events. There we go, another apocalyptic story on Earth after the unexplained disintegration of the moon. So I think what happens is the moon shatters and blankets the Earth in this sort of white sky of hard rain of the bolides, causing the atmosphere to heat. You get like a massive greenhouse effect, heating the Earth up, boiling the oceans, and rendering Earth uninhabitable, basically. So I think what happens is the humans become a space-based civilization, and it's set in fairly future, and then thousands of years afterwards, when 7 different aspects of civilization come back to the Earth after several thousand years, which sounds really interesting, and I like, again, these epoch-spanning stories. But the fact that it's Neil Stevenson, who I love, and the fact that Barack Obama liked it, and he's an intelligent guy, really kind of drew me to that. So I think that'll be my next read to snuggle up with, if that makes sense. So put that on your list.
Yeah, it's I've already added 2 to my basket. I'm just working out which ones I've got credits for and which ones I haven't. So.
Oh yes, for your Audible thing.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Brilliant. Okay, that's some good recommendations there. And as I said before, we're going to make sure we put all of these books down on the show notes if you want to refer back to them and peruse them. I've been enjoying our book club tonight. I'm very relaxed. It's nice to chat about something different as well.
Yes.
We'll probably wax lyrical on other genres like comics in another podcast, but it's been great to hear what you've been talking about today. And if you have any questions about these books or anything else, you can get hold of us via our Twitter handles, as we always talk about at the end of the show. Mine is at John PR Evans. Alex, you are
at Alex Hansford.
And Amy, yours is always quite an interesting one. I like this one. Yours is
mine is at Awakey.
Not a sleepy, a wakey.
Definitely a wakey.
You can also obviously get hold of us at Play Pause Turn on Twitter. And now that we're also on Apple Podcasts, we'll be spamming you with lots of information about our podcast to come up on Twitter. And obviously you can go to our site as well, which is playpauseturn.show. So this has been Play Pause Turn, and thank you for listening.